Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to WeatherBrains episode number 762. The pre-show, it's a magical, marvelous time where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and occasionally we say outrageous things. This is for August 24th, 2020, the year that never ends. And what we're going to do right now is put the embed code over to one of our websites so we can be on television. For those that don't know, this show is broadcast locally on the .2s and cable systems and things like that. And if you are new to the show, looking for the actual content, move the slider over about 13 minutes. And that will get you there. But you never know that sometimes the best part of this, it is the pre-show. So, got to get everybody on here. So let's do some inviting. What do you say? And got a good show tonight. Dr. Neil Jacobs, the acting administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, will be on the show tonight. So that'll be fun. So let's get everybody on here. I know that Troy is out and Bill Murray is out, but I think everybody else is in. So you're going to see them pop up on the screen just like magic here in just a moment. And I've actually got to invite two people myself because Bill is not here. Typically, Bill Murray handles all of this. So let me get these guys going. Got Kevin Laws coming on the show tonight. Kevin is the Sioux Science Operations Officer, the National Weather Service in Birmingham, Alabama. Be fun to have him on the show. And let's see here. What other goodies do I need to do? I feel like I haven't done something. Totally feel like I haven't done something, but I'll figure it out when it doesn't happen. So we got tropical action. We'll talk about the tropics, obviously. Marco fizzled. Laura looks somewhat impending for the southwest Louisiana coast. Our friends in Lake Charles. And we'll obviously talk about that here tonight. Jen, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm so happy we're on Zoom. I don't have to worry about the Google Meet.
I was a little worried, but I was worried about
Confusion.
Zoom. Zoom was acting weird today.
It was out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was out this morning. We use it to do a, I do all these radio stations, and one of them, well, I guess most of them do video now. So for some of these guys, I have to be on camera with them. And Skype will not allow you to route a virtual camera into the system, which is really odd.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to use Skype. So I was stuck with a green wall. I couldn't key anything. I couldn't show graphics or anything because Zoom was out.
Mm-hmm.
And I see Dr. Laws is on the show. Kev,
Hello,
can you
sir.
hear us? Make the gallery view so I can see everybody. All right, let me get Neil on here.
Okay.
Bill is out, and typically he would do this, so I'm going to invite him. And there he goes.
And I'm all ready for the Bruce and Jay show. So I've got my email ready to invite them later.
Yeah. I've got a format sheet here. I mean, it's like you're making this way too complicated here. So you're going to invite Bruce Jones and Dr. Hobgood when the recorded segments play.
Mm-hmm. And when you come out of those, I'll talk to Bruce a little bit about the weather radio stuff, and we'll have you bring up the graphic, and then Nate will take it over with Dr. Hopgood.
Okay. And Nate is now here. So we are good.
No Troy tonight. I told him he had to be here next week because we've got Lon Curtis on next week. He said he wouldn't miss it. So
okay, good. Oh, Nate.
Hi there.
The bearded one. Kevin, do you think Nate looks good in his beard?
No, I was talking the other day about these NC State graduates. And I think Nate was a year ahead of me, right?
I don't know. When I graduated in 99,
Okay.
December of 99.
Okay. And a bunch of us, Hurricane Center guys, Chris, Darden, a bunch of us were all right there sort of together. And half of us look like we're about 60 years old, and the other half look like they're 20. What happened?
Does Jamie Rome ever age is my question.
Robbie Bird, this guy's like the eternal youth down there in Miami, I guess.
So here comes Aubrey. And I sent Neil's invite to his NOAA address, and that's the one that Bill gave me. So hopefully he'll join us here in a second. We got 8 minutes. We're good. Aubrey, what's on your mind?
Hi, how are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Good. We are hoping for no more rain.
Dry. So, Kev, we're going to have tornadoes in Tuscaloosa Thursday night?
I don't think so. I think the center's a little too far away. Sweet spot.
But you know,
I think the sweet spot is about 186 miles from the center.
Were you here during
That's
Rita
awful
by any chance in
specific.
05?
I was watching from afar, but I do remember Rita. In fact, we looked it up today. Jackson, Mississippi had 55 tornadoes. They issued 191 tornado warnings for that event.
Wow.
How many did Birmingham have?
30, I want to say.
It was busy.
Right?
I mean, they were like, they were like LP supercells. You could see these suckers. I mean, we had them on camera. I mean, it was way, way, way busier than we thought that day. And I think Rita came
about
in
the same path, I think.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only thing that worries me is look at these analogs. And if you look at Rita, of course, that was a pretty strong hurricane, but that thing really produced a lot of tornadoes around here. So
I think what may save us is that Rita was a really large storm diameter, and this one's kind of more of a compact deal. So maybe we will skip it. We'll see.
I'm not in the mood for it, so that's good.
Enough to last me a lifetime, pal.
So we are waiting on Kim and Neil, and I think we can start. But I don't know why I started so early. I did enough. Usually and everybody's got a podcast now. So people invite me to be on their show. I typically do it Monday evening before this. So I was on another podcast and we wrapped up, and I was just sitting here and got bored and just opened up the pre-show early. So I'm never this early. So Bill is watching dirty movies tonight. What's he doing?
I don't know about dirty movies, but he's watching a film festival.
Film
festival.
Oh, okay.
And they're doing a drive-in. Yeah.
When I was a teenager, we tried to sneak into an R-rated movie called Night Call Nurses. I'll never forget it. And we got within a block of the theater and chickened out. We didn't have the guts to try. So I never got to see Night Call Nurses. Maybe that's what Bill's watching tonight. I don't know, but I somehow doubt it. Funny the things you remember about being a kid. Why I remember that.
Around the corner, so I'll be sure to ship it to you.
Oh man, it was at the Tide Theaters in Tuscaloosa. They used to have movie theaters on University Boulevard right down from campus, and we were going to slip in and Of course, you know, we looked like we were 10 years old. There was no way we were getting in. So, man, did you see the flooding in Panama City today? Wow. They had some water down there today. A bunch.
Mm-hmm.
Was it over 11 inches? I think I saw. That was the last report I saw.
I need to look. I don't have a total, but I saw all the video and the photographs, and it looked pretty pretty flooded there. But we didn't have any tornadoes, to my knowledge, in the Panhandle today, which is good. And it just rained here. Kevin, did it rain at your estate there? Where do you live, in Mountain Brook or?
I live in Pelham.
Pelham. I bet you did rain at your house.
No, nothing today.
Okay, it just poured here for about 5 minutes. So now we're waiting on Dr. Jacobs, and we can start. Here comes Kim. And again, I sent him the invite by his regular NOAA address. Let me see. I sent Kevin's to his super duper secret address.
They were saying at one point NOAA was blocking the Zoom, so.
Right. He said it was okay. And again,
let me.
Yeah, if you have the magic text number, you might just hit him up and see if there's and you can drop in the chat here a little private address if we need to use one.
See if I
Kim.
Hi, Kim.
Hi, guys. How are you all doing?
Doing good. Good to see you.
I just checked the Google Meet, and according to Google Meet, no one else is here. So.
Yeah, okay. We had some spam on the, we got a WordPress issue on that weatherbrains.com site. There was some junky junk posts over there. We are infested with something, but I have put our web guy on it. Sometimes WordPress, the plugins and stuff, you get some pretty weird code injections and they will do some strange things. But I deleted them so that nobody could see them. All right, we're coming up on the top of the hour here. And if Dr. Jacobs is not available at the top of the hour, we'll just start the show and we'll bring him in when he joins. How about that? And if Dr. Jacobs by chance can't make it, Kevin will be we'll just grill Kevin for the next 60 minutes.
Kevin had to do the 12Z balloon launch this morning. Cut him a little slack.
Yeah. No. Kevin, did you do the 12Z balloon launch this morning?
12 and 18, pal.
And 18Z. He did the 12Z and the 18Z balloon launch. Wow. Very nice. The man never sleeps. He's a sleepless wonder. Well, what I'm going to do, let's start the show here. It's top of the hour at 8. Let's start the show, and then we'll bring in Neil when he joins us. So let me get the recorders going here. Record track number 1, record track number 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, it's WeatherBrains, episode number 7. Uh-oh, you know what I did? I forgot the sponsor intro. I do this like every week. JP, sorry.
Take 2.
False start. Take two. Here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
WeatherBrains is brought to you by the great folks at Midland Weather Radio. Every home, school, and business should have a NOAA Weather Radio, the official voice of the National Weather Service.
Hey, this is WeatherBrains episode number 762. This is the weekly show all about weather, oldest weather podcast in the universe. Not so sure we're the best, but we are the oldest, and it's great to have you guys here. We have a very important guest that will be joining us here in just a second. We will have Nate introduced, but Jen, what's happening in Columbus? Anything exciting happening there?
It's pretty quiet here. It's gotten hotter. We're looking at some 90s for the next few days, and then eventually we may have some moisture coming in from Laura, depending on the track, which we could use a little bit of tropical something, but it was nice there for a while. I was giddy with my 70s, and now we're back into the 90s, but pretty quiet actually.
Awesome. Aubrey, are you excited because you're going to have drier weather? Is that the story?
We'd like to have some drier weather. Our poor Stanton has picked up 14 inches of rain in the last 2 weeks, and we've had 2 pretty big flash flooding events, with one that was a horrible flash flooding event. So, you know, I know maybe parts of our northern counties would like a little bit of rain, but we have to give Stanton a break. I mean, they're so vulnerable right now, and the creeks are still running very, very high.
Okay, awesome. I hope you can do some email tonight, because you know who sent us some audio?
Tarmo.
We've not had audio from Tarmo in like, what, 2 or 3 years. I mean, that's the highlight of our show, is when Tarmo sends in some audio. So we'll have that coming up. And Kim, good to see you in Norman. Will you catch any moisture from the tropical system? Probably not, huh?
Probably not. We were hoping for it, but it doesn't look like it's the most likely thing to be in the cards, especially as the chances for anything coming into Texas wane, so do our chances. We could really kind of use the moisture, but compared to everything that you guys are discussing, nothing to complain about. Last week, in the last several weeks, my complaint has been our dew point temperature being above 70. And since WeatherBrains last week, I believe we have kept it below 70 the entire time.
Ooh,
right now, we've been sitting at
congratulations.
56. It's amazing.
Wow, that doesn't happen where we are down here. Goodness, but speaking of tropical systems in Oklahoma, came out, and one of the biggest flash flood events I've ever experienced in my life was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, from a Pacific tropical system called Tico. And I want to say this was back in the early 80s. It was a long time ago, but wow, it came across Baja, then came up through the Southwest, and it was nasty. So tropical systems can influence Oklahoma weather from time to time, but let's see. Nate, we got to bring in our special guest here. I'm going to turn the floor over to you, because we have some exciting news here.
All right. First, introduce our guest panelist for tonight, Kevin Laws. He is the Science and Operations Officer for the National Weather Service in Birmingham, Alabama. Kevin, welcome to the program. A fellow NC State grad. Go Wolfpack. I'm representing, for those watching the show, I'm representing my Wolfpack here. How are things for you tonight?
Yep, doing well, Nate. How are you?
Doing all right. Looks like you had a chance to launch a couple of balloons today from the office.
Yep, we started the specials late last week, Friday, I think, and so we do those for the Hurricane Center for those off-run models, and looks like they've done pretty well with this forecast. This is a pretty tough forecast. I think when it comes across the land like Cuba and things, it's really a toss-up what happens on the other side. So looks like they've done a pretty good job so far.
And Marco making landfall this evening. We're recording this on Monday, August 24th, and a couple of hours ago, Marco made landfall at the mouth of the Mississippi, and not as a hurricane, but as a tropical storm, and expected to more or less fizzle out in the next day and a half or so, which I suppose is good news. We were worried about a potential double hit between Marco and Laura, and we still could get that, but at least the first round isn't going to live up to the kind of pain that we were worried about at one point.
There we go.
So we are happy to welcome a special guest to tonight's program, and another NC State graduate, Dr. Neil Jacobs. He is the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Environmental Observation and Prediction, and performing the duties of Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere, which I think is the closest in the org chart to the president that we've ever had as a guest on WeatherBrains in 762 episodes. Dr. Jacobs, welcome to the program. Good to have you with us.
It's awesome to be here. I've been looking forward to this for months.
We're glad to have you on. And first, I'm going to sort of jump ahead to my pick of the week for this week. At tail end of last week, I did something on Twitter based on something that one of my colleagues in Boston posted, talking about the anniversary of the landfall of Hurricane Bob, and how he knew that was the day that he knew that weather was where he wanted to have his career. And so I'll put that same question to you. Is there a single event or single day that you can point to as driving your interest in weather, or is it something that has just sort of grown and you grew into over the years?
So yes and yes. So I guess there's two answers to that question. First of all, my two major passions are surfing and fishing, both of which require a really good weather forecast. But I would say the one major event that really, I guess, got my attention was Hurricane Hugo. So ironically, I grew up in Miami, in South Miami Heights, which is not far from Homestead, but I moved to Charleston before Andrew hit, and got to Charleston just in time for Hugo to hit. And at the time,
welcome to town, right?
Oh yeah, it was so, coming from Miami, I thought, I've been through a bunch of hurricanes. I know how this goes. But what you don't really think about in South Florida that you have in South Carolina are a whole bunch of pine trees. And it just blew all these trees down. And we had 14 trees go down in our yard, and 2 of them went through the roof. And we waited out the storm because we thought, we're from Miami. It was the tree damage that, I had to chainsaw my way out of my own driveway down the street, and there was just trees everywhere. So you couldn't get anywhere. You couldn't pump gas. You couldn't get water. And that I think really, really got my attention, and not just from a forecasting perspective, because that storm really rapidly intensified right before landfall, but also just from a preparedness, a situation where we had food and water. We were without power for 3 weeks, and after the first couple of days, I was a kid, so I didn't really, I thought, oh, this is great, but then it started to get really stressful and really bad into like the second and third week.
I was in just outside of Winston-Salem, a little bit north of Charlotte, and when Hugo came through, I was 10. So I actually had my 10th birthday party in the dark. We'd sleep over, as kids do and everything, and it was fun for the first couple of days, and then it starts to get hot and humid, and the lack of bathing and hot meals and everything starts to wear on you.
Yeah, I remember when the front side of the storm went through, just being able to feel the walls of the house kind of move back and forth. And then it got super quiet. And so I went outside in the yard with my dad, and you could see the stars. And all I remember was how humid it was, and all I could smell was pine sap. And then when the backside of the eye wall started coming, you could hear the winds getting louder, and you could just hear what sounded like crunching toothpicks. And it was just more pine trees going down.
Yeah. So you turn that into a degree in math and physics from the University of South Carolina. Was the weather bug still eating at you at that point?
It was. So I started out in engineering. And I really like the theory better than the application. And so my engineering advisor convinced me to change my major to physics. And there at USC, the degree program requires so much math that I think with like 2 more math classes, you can pick up a math degree. So I started there, and actually started a master's in physics there. And then just had a couple of big moments in my life that really made me rethink my career choice. And I thought, you know what, I've been sitting here watching the Weather Channel and forecasting storms to figure out when I'm going to go surfing. And of course, if the waves weren't good, then I'd be fishing. So I thought, I got to figure out how to do this for a living. I'm doing it anyway. I might as well get paid for it. And so I looked at a couple different schools, and you know, I didn't want to be too far away from home, so I was going to stay on the East Coast, and ended up settling at NC State. So Lynn Pietrafesa basically talked me into coming to NC State.
Who's now in South Carolina, ironically.
I know.
Coastal Carolina.
Yeah. He was the department head at the time. And so I studied under him, doing air-sea interaction with him and Sethu Raman and Ping Tong Shah and Liang Zhe. And then it basically was, you know, kind of the career student thinking, this is nice. I like learning. I don't really, you know, I don't know that I want a PhD, but one of the things that the grad students there told me, they said, going back to school is really hard once you get out in the workforce. And I just thought, well, I'm just going to go straight on through and see what happens. And so I started a PhD program there, and that's when Gary Lackman came. I added him as my co-advisor. So Gary and Sethu Raman for my PhD. And that was my dissertation topic, was you remember that January 2000 blizzard we had, like 2 feet of snow, and the models are
amazing.
3 inches.
That is the pinnacle of my meteorological career right there.
I remember it. So I lived, and
nobody expected it.
I know. I lived on Gorman Street with Steve Salibi, who's now out in Colorado, I think. And so we were going. So there was a bunch of folks over at the climate office, and the weather service there was like on the 3rd floor. And so we'd go outside and measure the snow, and the forecast would be 3 to 4 inches, and there's like 5 inches on the ground. And then they would say 5 to 7 inches, and there's like 8 inches on the ground. And it just kept going and going. And finally it was like 22 something inches, 24 inches. It was crazy. And so then Gary was like, hey, I got a good PhD topic for you. Why don't you figure out what went wrong in the models? So I was there, and Mike Brennan, who's now at the Hurricane Center, was studying. So I looked at the sea surface temperature influence on the frontogenesis related to the Gulf Stream, that baroclinic instability. And then Mike actually looked at the potential vorticity. There was some latent heat release from some precipitation that was moving through well in advance of the storm. And I think that there was probably some deepening due to that latent heat release that helps spin up the upper level vortex. When you put all those pieces back into the models, they get the forecast right. I remember at the time, the models were using like this 30-day monthly mean for sea surface temperatures, and it washes out all the Gulf Stream influence. Mm-hmm. And I remember looking at some ship ops and some buoy data really close to the coast, and right along the beach, and the temperatures were like, I think it was like 70 degrees Fahrenheit at the Frisco Pier or something, which is crazy. Yeah. For that time of year, it's normally like in the 40s or upper 30s.
So you talked about modeling, and that's your PhD was talking about putting these things back in the model and the forecast, getting them right. Sort of jump forward to today and where we are. There's still a lot of the back and forth between the GFS and the European, and we're embarking on a new approach to how we do modeling here, more a community-based approach. Can you talk a little bit about EPIC? What is that? How has that come to be, and how do you see that as we look ahead to the future of numerical weather prediction in the U.S.?
So this whole idea, it was interesting. This actually came to me long before my career path ever had NOAA in the mix. I was working with pretty much a mostly NC State team at a company, AirDat, that were putting commercial weather sensors on commercial airlines, similar to the AMDAR program. And then running the WRF model to do quality control for observation minus background statistics. And the Weather Service had actually had a feed to the TAMDAR data. But when we started deploying globally, we needed to run basically a global model to do quality control all over the planet instead of 50 different WRF domains. So we started running the GFS, which at the time, like 2004, 2005, was next to impossible. It was hard coded for IBM machines. We ended up giving up on trying to port it to Linux and just bought a really expensive IBM computer. And once we figured out how to run the GFS, a lot of different people at universities were coming to me when I was at Panasonic saying, hey, we've got this idea that we think might improve the GFS, but INSEP they're strapped for compute resources, and there's a big development queue with all their scientists, and so they don't have time or the extra compute resources to test this. Can you test it in your model? And we actually spun up a version of the GFS in the cloud, which was interesting because we could just call up the cloud service provider and say, hey, we want X more nodes, and we could spin up an additional parallel version of it and test out their whatever enhancement they wanted to share. And so the first question I'd always ask them is, hey, have you folks told INSEP about this? And so I started talking to Bill LaPinta. It was interesting. I went up to INSEP to do a brown bag lunch seminar on this strategy. And I remember after the seminar wrapped up, I was sitting talking to him in his office, and he's like, it would be so cool if the community had access to our code and could run our model and do tests with it and share that stuff back. And like 10 seconds after he said that earthquake in DC hit. And we were all just standing around like no one knew what it was. And so we ran out of the building and, fast forward to me getting to NOAA. And I thought, well, here's my chance. Step one is port all the code over to an architecture which the community has access to, which is the Unified Forecast System. I posted a post on the MAP listserv, I think a few months ago, where I was actually able to get the entire FV3 GFS running on my laptop. Not very fast and not at a high resolution, but still it was doable. And not only just port it over to architecture that the community has access to, but make it user-friendly. So this goes back to the graduate student test. So the test is, can your average atmospheric science graduate student download the code and compile it and get it to run? And I think they said the goal was 6 hours or something. And so that was step one, port the code over and then because not everyone has access to a giant supercomputer to run stuff on. So can you make it run in the cloud or on a laptop or whatever? I would like the UFS to be the de facto experiment that everyone's doing, work on and writing papers on like they're doing with WRF now. And then the second part is where EPIC fits in. And this is something that, I talked about it at AMS. What do we do when the community starts providing all these enhancements to us? How do we test it? How do we check it? And so we need sort of a really organized process of developing parallel runs and testing out all these different improvements and enhancements, because, the end game here is to improve INSEP's operational forecasting system. So if someone comes along and says, hey, I've improved the physics, but it quadruples the runtime, we either have a bunch of software engineers try to fix it or it's a lost cause. So there's some trade-offs there, but these are the things that we need to check and manage. So it's not just a complete wild west of software development. So EPIC's really sort of designed as a way to test and vet not just external, but also internal developments to next generation code. And we've already put all the UFS out on the GitHub, and the amount of interest and downloads have shocked me. There's a lot of people that are playing with it now, which is great.
So I have to ask, because this I know was going to be your topic at your talk at the NWA annual meeting in Huntsville last year, about a year ago. And then we had Dorian and some disputes about forecast information and whether it was valid, and then there were statements and everything. What's the fallout from that been for you in terms of your personal, professional? Where has that landed for you? And how do you feel like we're, as a community, are we better off, worse off as a result of that?
That's a great question. So I think there's so much that we learned from that, and a lot of good stuff has come out that hasn't been realized yet. So, I think I always try to look at the silver lining in everything. And I think that there was a lot, well, first of all, before I dive into that, I got to really thank James for tweeting out before I went and gave that talk at the NWA. He and a couple other people really said, hey, give this guy a chance. Let's hear him out. And I really appreciate that. That was probably one of the hardest talks I've by far ever had to give in my entire life. Because
let me just say, Neil, you were outstanding. I mean, that was hard. I mean, I could feel the anxiety.
I've never been in a room professionally, in any professional setting, where the tension was that thick. Is that fair, James? You were in a room?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've been doing this a long time, but Neil, nobody left, and people had compassion. And you had all kind of people in there, but just understand, I think everybody was on your side. So thanks for carrying on and being there. You didn't have to do that. You could have canceled. So that spoke to your integrity. So thank you so much for being there and carrying through.
Well, that I think that was probably, but that was something that even as a kid growing up, my parents, one of the messages they said is they're like, look, we don't care if you come in dead last, but if you quit, don't come home. We didn't raise a quitter. And so I just thought, I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to walk away from this. These are my people. I mean, these are people that I worked with, I went to school with, some of them I taught. And I felt like I had to go down there and talk to everyone. And, they can judge me however they want, as long as they hear, my side of the story. And, I think the coming out of that, we've got a really solid process in place, and Ken Graham is doing a fantastic job down there right now. And I just, between what the Hurricane Center is doing and what all the different forecast offices are doing, particularly with all the challenges going on, these people are coming to work and just doing a heck of a job. But things like, how do you explain probabilistic forecasting? What does the cone mean? How do you interpret spaghetti plots? I was looking at some ensemble output earlier tonight, and just because the ensemble mean is clustered in one area doesn't necessarily mean the forecast is going to shift, because it may not be the model, it could be the initial conditions. So I always looked at this from the modeler perspective, where I thought, if I could improve the model and improve the forecast, then I would instantly save more lives. But there's a social science component of this, where the models now are so good that how do you explain, probabilistic guidance to, your average person and get them to make a really informed decision. So, I mean, I don't know if Kim's still on. I don't see her in the window, but
she's there.
She's here.
She's doing an awesome job on a lot of the probabilistic guidance, particularly when it comes to trying to figure out how to use probabilities for informed decisions on tornadoes, which is something that, it's really interesting. What if you try to put it in probabilities of of an EF5 versus a 1. So yeah, that, I think going back to your first question, there was, I learned a lot. I think the agency is going to come out better for it. Even there's a lot of policies that we're going to go drill down into and take a look at and make a lot of changes that, unfortunately, you don't realize there might be weaknesses here and there until you have something like this. So, you know, yeah, I could have walked away from it, but now that I know this stuff, my job here is to improve it. So it's not an issue when I leave.
Is there anything about the period from the 1st of September until the NWA meeting that, you know, looking back on it, you do differently?
You know, I mean, I think at that point, everything was kind of set into motion, and, you know, no, I think I thought, do I go to, you know, NWA or not? And I was getting email from people and they're like, oh, you know, they're going to walk out. You shouldn't go. You know, but I talked to folks on the team and there's 100% support. They said, look, if you want to go down there and do this, you know, we'll back you. So, you know, no, I wouldn't have. I definitely think it was the right thing to go down there and talk to everybody.
I want to follow up on that, Neil. I don't know if you can see me, but this is
I can.
the voice. Great, the voice of Kim, speaking from the beyond. Great
Show
to
title.
see you. Yeah, it's great to see you. And I want to just walk this back a step. I appreciate that Nate has helped us to get into the conversation about some of the things you've had to do in your role as sort of the acting administrator of NOAA. And for people who had been listening to the conversation thus far, they might have easily skimmed over the fact that you have these administrative responsibilities that have come with that job. Obviously, you were enticed into the role through your desire to help out the modeling community and to really advance these causes that you'd so long believed in. But can you tell us a little bit about how it is that you've viewed and framed this role when you were asked to take this on? You know, obviously it was a pretty big departure from the private sector that you'd been in. Tell us a little bit about that, how you viewed the role and what it's been like as a part of your life for the past several years.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. You get this phone call and they say, you know, this is a position, you know, are you interested? And of course, you know, I'm not going to say no. Yeah, of course I'm interested. But you know, there's NOAA is so complex. A lot of people don't realize that, you know, the majority of my day is spent doing agency stuff, you know, budget, policy, and I would say, you know, 60 to 70% of it's probably fisheries related. You know, fixing the weather model is an easy issue to solve, in my opinion, compared to some of these problems that we're dealing with, trying to, you know, make all the different stakeholders in the fisheries happy. But yeah, you know, it's strange because as you know, I come in and there's all of these career folks, you know, higher than the GS scale, like the SES folks who've been there their entire careers, and they all know exactly how the process works. And so here's, you know, I show up to the meeting and I'm the new guy, and everyone else on my team who now works for me knows more about the process than I do. So it's kind of strange to sit here and say, well, you know, I can't just come in and tell you how to run something that you've been running for 3 decades. So I came in with a list of priorities. These are the different things I want to try to accomplish. And if you tell people, you know, this is what you're supposed to do, you know, you're never going to get anywhere. But if you convince them, hey, this is really cool, this is going to be great for, you know, the country, and get them excited about it because they actually see benefit in it, then they know what to do. And so my goal was just to try to get, you know, as much resources for everyone as I could to support the things that I really wanted to see them do, and just, you know, get out of their way and let them do their thing. And just try to clear out all of the other nonsense that it ultimately ends up being a distraction for them.
Go, Kev.
Yeah. Hey, Neil, good to see you again.
Good to see you. How have you been?
Good. So I was kind of curious about, I'll follow what Kim said. So do you think maybe the folks at NOAA were scared that you were going to outbeat them on the models? I mean, why do you think it was you? What they're not asking you to be the head of the National Weather Service. They're asking you to be the head of NOAA. So, I mean, what do you think? Are you sitting at dinner one night, you just get this random phone call, or how does that process work?
It's kind of it's a little bit of a mystery. I don't completely understand how the process works. I talked to in advance, Admiral Gallaudet. I talked to a couple other people that had been selected for the team. I spent a lot of time talking to Barry Myers. I knew him, back from his days at AccuWeather, and I think that, maybe there was some kind. So I originally wasn't picked to be the head of NOAA. I was picked to be the assistant secretary for environmental observation and prediction. And so my career to that point was, probably the first person in private industry who ran a team that figured out how to run the global model and actually make improvements on it to outperform the operational model. But then also one of the first, I think we might have been the first company to fully establish a public-private partnership where we were selling commercial aircraft data or commercial, any kind of weather data to the Weather Service as a subscription service. So it wasn't like we're going to sell you a bunch of instruments and you go collect the data. The business model was, you let us worry about the calibration and everything, and we're just going to sell you the feed. So it takes a lot of the risk off of the Weather Service. And so between my background in modeling and public-private partnerships for observations, I felt like I kind of had a mix of observations and modeling experience, which was what that position was for. But really, I think a lot of people don't realize this about my background is I've worked in the recreational fishing industry. I've worked in the commercial fishing industry. I have a lot of background on that, even though I don't have any formal academic training. So I understood a lot of the issues and concerns there. And so, you get to a point in an administration where they said, hey, look, you're here, you're the acting person, we're just going to nominate you. I was doing the job as the acting anyway, so.
All right, Neil, so we got 2 more minutes in our 30-minute window here. So if you could tell practitioners one thing as a modeler about using numerical weather prediction, guys working at the Weather Service, private sector, what would you tell them?
So let's see. So what would I tell people in private industry about working with the models? Yeah, no, practitioners. These are any people forecasting the weather. What's something that we need to know that maybe we don't know? What's the one thing you could tell us, some advice, a tip? Because we live and die by numerical weather prediction these days. It defines who we are. And sometimes I wonder if maybe there's some things we still need to learn. And you're the man. You are it. Well, the things that I'm really focused on trying to improve are, I think the trick, how are we going to improve the models? It's all data assimilation and initial conditions for whether people like it or not. It's an initial value problem. And it's like, if you start out with garbage, you're going to get garbage output. And so, quality control, data assimilation, I think those are the tricks. And the thing that I think worries me a little bit about going to these much, much higher resolution models are that we don't have the observation density to populate it necessarily at that resolution. So you're just really looking at a lot of high-res spatial interpolation. If I was going to just tell anyone any one piece of advice who was forecasting, and most forecasters I feel like they may know this already, but I put so much emphasis on ensembles. I know a lot of people really like to look at the deterministic model and they say, well, this model said this and this model said that. But I mean, if you line up all those runs, you get zingers here and there, but the ensembles, that's sort of where you really understand where things are going. So I think the days of deterministic modeling are numbered. I think with the advancements we have in compute, we're going to high res, convective resolving ensemble. And, I don't know, maybe someone will do a large eddy simulation deterministic model if they really want to, but this really all falls back to the social science community, because trying to explain and derive information from probabilities is not easy.
That's why Kim makes the big bucks. All right, Kev, go.
Okay, I want to say this up front before I ask him another question here, but with dealing with the two tropical systems, we've set up these regional operations centers. The Southern region has one in Fort Worth, and the guys there, Tim Oram, Jennifer McNabb, have done a phenomenal job this week of herding all the cats. I mean, they deal with a dozen weather forecast offices. They deal with 4 or 5 national centers. They deal with river forecast centers. All of the warnings and watches have to be in place, and we all have to look and collaborate together. And those guys have just done long hours. All they get is complaints from everybody, and they have done really well, very patient, answering everybody's problems and questions. So I want to make sure Dr. Jacobs knew that for sure. Those guys are just have done an outstanding job this week. But what I want to ask you is, something that we will never experience as laymen out here is getting to go to the White House and dealing with all that. Walk us through the process of getting to go to White. Are you nervous when you're in there? Is it a place of reverence? Do they give you a cavity search before you go in? Just walk us through that process. It's something we will never get to experience.
It's humbling, I mean, it's when you walk into the White House or into the Oval Office, it's a very large, intimidating room. And I just pinch myself when I go in there, because I'm just like, I didn't see myself here, 5 or 6 years ago. But I think it's just a real honor to not just be able to do this job and serve the country, but really, I feel like I'm working for the Weather Service and the NOAA employees. I'm so proud of everything we do and all the hard work that everyone's doing, that every chance I get to go over there and tell everyone about it, it's an exciting day. There's a lot of security, and as you can imagine, but we've all had to go through security clearance, background checks, and everything else. So they know who you are. It's not like if you're not a federal employee and you're a guest, there's probably some different level of scrutiny that you have to go through if you don't have security clearances. But it's awesome. It is a really, really cool experience that I'm never going to forget.
So want to wrap up. I appreciate you sticking around with us as long as you have. I have one last question, and it was in the notes that you sent to Kevin earlier today. Talk to me about driving a big rig.
Oh, yeah. So I've had a lot of odd jobs over the years, from working a fryer to cutting bait. But when I was, and so Kevin may remember some of this. When I was at NC State, one of my assistant ships was maintaining all the university vehicles for the department. And so we had a couple of labs down at the coast too. And so the NC State paid for me to get a commercial driver's license so I could drive all this marine equipment back and forth from the coast. And so it would be, a bunch of moorings and, buoys and equipment and stuff like that. And it was kind of great, because they had kind of like this small, it wasn't like a dump truck, but it was, and then they periodically would rent like a much bigger flatbed. And then I always saw it, if my career just, if I just get unhappy with whatever I'm doing, I could just go, drive a truck and not have to deal with people and just, listen to books on tape or, And so, yeah, I had a commercial driver's license for driving that rig. Courtesy
Very
of
cool.
state.
The things you didn't know about the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Environmental Observation and Prediction, Dr. Neil Jacobs. Thank you for your time this evening. We appreciate you coming on WeatherBrains, and appreciate you being a fan of the show. And hopefully, we'll have you on again.
I am. I periodically will sit down and binge watch 2 or 3 episodes.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I was, when Kevin and James reached out a while ago, I was like, all right, I feel like, I should dial into this more often just to geek out on weather because, pretty much most of my day is, like I said, policy, budget,
yep.
fish, personnel issues. I don't get to talk about weather anymore. I was sitting there looking at the forecast.
Well, I'm about to say, Neil, where's Laura going? Let's just get right to the chase here. Ooh. I mean, you, sir, the model king of the universe. So where's this thing coming in?
So here's my hunch. And, for your official forecast guidance, trust the professionals at the Weather Service and the Hurricane Center. Not this guy. I think we're going to see that ridge build back a little bit. And push the track potentially a little bit further west. I think some of the ensemble guidance is possibly trending west, but I don't think we'll have a good picture on that until it gets over Cuba and spins up. Actually, there's kind of a cold pool out there that it's going to have to go over first. So, unfortunately, I think once it gets over that cold pool and gets back over warm water, it's like T-minus 24 hours before landfall. So, I think I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the track shift a little bit further to the west. My bigger concern is rapid intensification, right as it approaches land, because if it runs into shear, it doesn't look like it's going to hit the shear until after landfall. So that I think, these are the events that people really need to pay close attention to and make sure that you're out listening to your state and local emergency managers, because you don't want to wait until the last minute and to see this thing spin up right before landfall and then be in a situation where you really should have gotten out of the way a day or 2 earlier.
Well, was that cold pool there before Marco, or was this upwelling from Marco?
I don't know. I looked at the SST data after Marco and it was there. It certainly looks like it was underneath the track from the upwelling, but I don't know if it was there before or not. But so this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the January 2000 storm with the sea surface temperature influence. If you use a 30-day monthly average, you're not going to see this type of short-term dynamic in the model. So this, going in the direction of these 2-way coupled models, our new HWRF and soon to be the new FE3 based ones, we'll be able to model that upwelling and stuff, which I think will be pretty cool. So that, really looking at the rapid intensification. But yeah, I guess we'll wait and see what happens once it gets on the other side of Cuba and gets away from the mountains and starts to spin up again. But that was, my last check of the models. I don't really get a whole lot of time to go look at the models. So, yeah, what do you guys think it's going to do?
Let's ask Kevin Laws. He knows everything. Sue's know everything. So, Kev, where's it going?
Yeah, well, in fact, we were talking about that all week, about that. We had this pesky upper low that was just sitting over us for the past week, it seemed like, and just wouldn't go anywhere. And then all of a sudden, magically, these tropical systems 2 in a row are coming, and it decides to pull out, and that Bermuda Ridge just digs back in. And I said, this thing is definitely going west. In fact, I pulled it out of the forecast, and then they brought the cone back over us again, and so we had to put it back in. But I am 100% agreement that we've all lived through that Bermuda Ridge. You know how strong that thing is, and it always seems like it's under prog, and so it definitely looked like that westward track was going to be a lot more favorable. So I tend to agree. Keep it west.
So Kevin just said that Houston, we have a problem, right?
hopefully not that far, but hey, we saw all kind of crazy things with these two merging together and all kind of stuff.
I thought for sure, we might see a Fujiwara at one point, but
I'm kind of glad we didn't, because then our media colleagues would have just run rabid with it. It would have been the next polar vortex. So I'm kind of glad we're not going to have to deal with that.
Yeah, that no one's gone after that term yet. While I'm here, I also wanted to give a big shout out to the OMAO folks flying the Hurricane Hunter planes. They have done a phenomenal job, and believe me, in a season like this, they are flying a ton of flights, and they've really, they've had to, to deal with a lot of additional things in addition to a normal challenging season by, making sure that they self-quarantine the different flight crews and stuff, so that they're not, you don't have someone who's contagious getting on a plane or something like that. So they've been having to be extra careful on top of just flying a whole bunch of missions. So
Nate, who's the guy on Twitter that's so good? Underwood?
Nick Underwood. Yeah. And he was talking about how,
awesome.
On top of everything else, they're having to, checking out Laura, and they're having to figure out where they can land when they come back. And there are different countries that they normally, or different places they normally land and just base out of while the storm was that far east, that are like, nope, not during COVID. We're good. We're full up. Thank you. And so they're having to, go out, it adds an extra hour and a half or 2 hours to the trip, kind of thing to be able to go out, and there's more gas and, all that kind of stuff. But so, yeah, hats off to them and to the 53rd Squadron out of Biloxi as well. They're doing yeoman's work for us in support of all of this.
But Neil, thanks for your time. We know you're a busy guy, and you're welcome on this show anytime you want to come on here. You know that.
Thank you, sir. I love it, and I love the show. And let me wrap up by saying the Weather Service, I'm proud of you folks. You're doing an awesome job, and I know a lot of the agencies on telework still were slowly phasing back in, coming to work, but these folks have been going into work the entire time. And doing their job just phenomenally.
Awesome. Again, thanks for your work, Neil. We got your back.
Thanks.
So we appreciate what you do, and you come on this show anytime you want to, but great to see you again.
Good to see you. Thanks.
Okay. Let's take a quick break here. We got Tony Rice, we've got Jen, and we're going to come back with we got a lot going on here. There's a lot more to go. So don't go away. WeatherBrains rolls along with this.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
Last week, SpaceX launched its 11th batch of Starlink satellites, bringing the total in orbit to 585 of the planned mega constellation, which could number as many as 42,000. The program has been met by concerns from amateur and professional astronomers alike, who have shared images of the night sky marred by streaks of light as flocks of the desk-sized satellites pass through their viewfinders. The company responded with additional protections on its latest batch of satellites, which prevent the highly reflective solar panels from shining back down onto Earth. But Starlink isn't the first controversial communication array that's been put into orbit. At the height of the Cold War, the US military realized that undersea cables could be cut and looked for an alternative path for communicating across the globe. In the early 60s, a ring of 480 million copper dipole antennas were launched into orbit. Known as the Westford Needles, each was about as long as a postage stamp and about a quarter the diameter of a human hair. That size was chosen based on the wavelength of the 8 gigahertz signal that would be used in the experiment. The needles were packed into blocks held together with a gel that would quickly evaporate in space. And over the next 2 months, they expanded to a 15 by 30 kilometer donut shape, which encircled the Earth. The goal was to create an artificial ionosphere that could be used to passively bounce radio signals around the world. Early tests were pretty successful, transmitting voice between California and Massachusetts and data at up to 20 kilobits per second. These speeds wouldn't be achieved via phone lines for another 30 years. The program also drew criticism from British astronomers and even the Soviet newspaper Pravda, which ran the headline, USA Dirty Space. But ultimately, the project would be scrapped as satellite technology provided much better ways to beam voice and data from place to place. It did leave a legacy, though, the UN's Outer Space Treaty of 1967, and it's focused on protecting against the militarization and degradation of outer space. Still, the 3 to 5 year expected lifespan of the needles came and went, and most of the needles wouldn't be re-entering the atmosphere until 1970. As of today, 40 separate clumps of needles remain orbiting at about 3,700 kilometers. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, an unexpected tornado outbreak occurred on August 24th, 2016. 22 tornadoes were recorded in portions of Ohio and Indiana. 2 tornadoes occurred in Ontario, Canada. This event is in the top 10 for the largest number of tornadoes in a single August day across the U.S. since records began in 1950. One of the strongest tornadoes of the day hit at 3:20 p.m. Eastern Time in Howard County, Indiana. It hit the Kokomo area. The tornado tracked over 8.5 miles with maximum winds estimated at 152 miles per hour. The Howard Haven Residential Center at 3600 West Boulevard received extensive damage. The director of the center, Jennifer Brower, protected one of the residents from flying glass by shielding her with her own body. They both received just minor injuries. In the Markland Mall area, a Starbucks was flattened. Shift supervisor Angel Ramos was hailed a hero for calmly asking the patrons to take shelter in the bathrooms. Everyone survived. Per the National Weather Service, a total of 1,000 homes sustained some degree of damage. As the residents of Kokomo were analyzing the damage around them, little did they know that 4 more tornadoes were to occur across parts of Howard County several hours after this devastating blow. It was a tremendously unnerving time for the community. These additional tornadoes steered clear of Kokomo with less damage. The August 24th, 2016 tornado brought back memories to a twister that hit practically this same area only 3 years before. On November 17th, 2013, an EF2 damaged well-built homes and other buildings on the south side of Kokomo. Get hooked on tornado history with us by going to our website, tornadotalk.com.
All right, so I was thinking about that event. First of all, I have a huge tie to Kokomo because I used to be on a radio station there, WWKI, KI Country. And as soon as this event happened, I called them up and I'm like, are you guys okay? What's going on? And I love that community. And Bruce, I want to bring you in because this event was called a surprise outbreak. We were not expecting it. I document that, how there was no tornado threat. It was all in Kansas and Missouri. And then as the day unfolded, there was a lot of post-analysis done on this event. But the National Weather Service warnings were excellent. I mean, they were spot on and there were no fatalities. There were some injuries, but folks were able to get to shelter. And if they had a weather radio, they would have known what's going on and they could have gotten that warning. So do you remember this event?
I do, Jen. I actually went to Kokomo with the folks from some of the TV stations in Indianapolis. We were up there either a few months afterward. I think it was a few weeks or a few months afterward. And the National Weather Service did a great job of getting the warning out. But once again, a lot of people said that they were kind of surprised by what happened. But again, it's a reminder that you need to have multiple and redundant ways of getting the information because it's easy not to hear something and to be surprised when in fact there was a good warning out on the storm.
Absolutely. I mean, they were on top of it. I mean, it was warning after warning, especially for Howard County. And I mean, they had 5 tornadoes go through. I wanted to tell you, I do a weather class for adults with disabilities, and I teach them over Zoom. And we are always talking about tornado warnings. And last week when I did the class, I brought up the promo. James, we've got that promo that's going on with Midland Weather Radio and was encouraging them to talk to your parents, talk to your caregivers, and get a weather radio because that is the best way to keep yourself safe. And we're talking about it all the time. And I said, you guys are my weather ambassadors. So get a weather radio. We have a great deal going on right now and have that and teach everyone in your group home or at your house with your parents how to stay safe, Bruce.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I find that if it's explained, people do understand the difference between a watch and a warning. It's just that a lot of people don't hear them often enough in a given year that that knowledge stays top of mind. But you know, if we reiterate these basics to people over and over again, the difference between a watch and a warning, turn around, don't drown, when thunder roars, go indoors, and you know, have a weather radio, have multiple ways of getting your warnings. When we constantly reiterate these messages, it does stick in people's mind and they do get it. So if you're watching right now, I would advise you, please have multiple ways of getting these weather warnings. You know, a cell phone is great, and TV warnings are great when you have your TV on, but you should also have a weather radio. And through the WeatherBrains broadcast, we're giving you a chance to get 15% off on a weather radio purchase. You can do it it's midlandusa.com. That's where you go. You just go to midlandusa.com and you can click on weather radios and you can order a desktop radio like that white one right there. Or if you're in a hurricane zone and you think you may be evacuating for hurricane activity, have one of these hand crank radios, these emergency crank radios, because those actually represent 5 of the items that you should have in your go kit. And you know, once they issue the hurricane watch, that go kit should be sitting right near your front door so you can take it and run if you need to. Gasoline tank is full of gasoline, cars backed into the driveway, the go kit sitting at the front door, and one of the items that belongs in every go kit is some kind of an emergency crank radio, because as the AM, the FM, the weather, it allows you to have a super bright flashlight, and then if you need to recharge your smartphone, you can plug it into this device, crank, and generate your own electricity. So Jen, thank you for carrying that message along. I know as meteorologists, we sometimes get tired of it and we think, oh my gosh, people have heard me say this so many times. But you know, James, as they used to tell us in radio, they'd tell us to mention the call letters of the station over and over and mention the contest over and over. And they'd say, about the time that you're getting sick and tired of mentioning the contest, the average listener is just beginning to hear it. So it's the same thing with these evergreen weather messages. The difference between a watch and a warning: turn around, don't drown, when thunder roars, go indoors. Have multiple ways of getting this information. We just need to remind people of this on a regular basis, and they'll get along with it. They'll get on the program.
Absolutely. Well, Bruce, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for what you do and for being a part of the show. And, you know, we look forward to seeing you every week.
Thanks.
And speaking of the tropics, we need to get with the program, Nate, because we've got more tropics to talk about. And we have another guest who I think is going to give us more insight on what in the world's going on here in the Gulf. And you're muted.
Whoops.
Hello.
It's probably good because I had some throat stuff going on there. Our guest tonight, our second guest tonight, Dr. Jay Hobgood from Ohio State University, or the Ohio State University, I've been paid to say. And Dr. Hobgood, welcome to the program. And want to talk, your research interests are in the tropics and in how we talk about hurricanes and how strong they are, how bad they're going to be. And let's just jump right into it. Tell me about the experimental hurricane wind intensity index.
All right, well, thanks, Nate, and thanks for having me on. After Hurricane Sandy, I decided I needed to come up with a better way of characterizing how much damage potential hurricanes had, because I would try to tell people that they needed to prepare for a major hurricane with Sandy. And I would hear over and over again, but it's only a category 1. And the Saffir-Simpson scale works great if you have an average size hurricane. You know, everybody knows what a Cat 1 or a Cat 3 or a Cat 5 for average size. But hurricanes come in different sizes. And so what I decided to do was come up with a hurricane index that takes into account size as well as intensity. And I didn't want to use a 5-point scale because we already use that for the Saffir-Simpson scale and for the enhanced Fujita scale. So I came up with a 100-point scale. Half the points come from the intensity, the maximum wind speed, and half the points come from the size. And the way the scale works is if you had a 200-mile-an-hour hurricane, that would get all 50 of the intensity points. And then they're scaled for weaker hurricanes. And if you have a hurricane the size of Hurricane Sandy, it would get all 50 intensity report points. And if the hurricane's smaller, and it's based on the 34 knot, the 50 knot, and the 64 knot wind radii in NHC's forecast advisories.
So how does that address an issue like a Sandy or an Ike? And how does that do that in a way that is, in your mind, is superior to other sort of per storm index like integrated kinetic energy, for example?
Right. Well, another thing that I wanted to do, because I do some consulting work and I work with the media on hurricanes, and I wanted something that you didn't need to be a physics major or a meteorology major to understand. I think integrated kinetic energy is a great scientific measure, and you do need really high resolution wind data to be able to calculate it around the hurricane, and that's not always available. But try to explain integrated kinetic energy to an emergency manager. And I'm not being unkind about emergency. They're smart people. They know a lot more about emergency management and other things, but it's not time in the middle of a hurricane to have a physics lesson and review kinetic energy. The same thing, there was a hurricane severity index that was based on the size intensity. It's somewhat similar to mine, but the problem was it used 100 knot wind radii in addition to the 34, 50, and 60. So it doesn't work for a storm like Sandy where the winds never get to 100 miles an hour. So I think mine does a better job of encapsulating the damage potential. And I went back and I calculated the index just before landfall for all hurricanes that hit the US between 2004 and 2013. And I found that size was actually a better predictor of damage than intensity. And when you combine size and intensity, you actually got a better prediction of damage than either of the individual components. And so I've been using this since 2013 for the work I've been doing to compare hurricanes. And I feel it gives me a better feel for how big and how strong hurricanes are.
So what do you think about, Marco's now made landfall and starting to move inland, hopefully will dissipate quickly. How does it look for Laura, and maybe how does that scale look for some of the more recent storms that we've had, in the last couple of years that draw our attention, thinking like a Dorian, for example?
Fortunately, Marco got sheared off by that trough over near Texas, and so minimal impacts, and it's really a non-factor. Laura scares me. Normally when a hurricane goes over Hispaniola, even strong hurricanes get ripped apart. But Laura went over Hispaniola, and the pressure actually decreased. And it was in an almost perfect upper level environment. It was right underneath an upper level high pressure system, an upper level ridge. So it actually had enhanced outflow, and the upper level
the outflow on satellite just looked gorgeous. It was textbook.
Yeah, there was no shear. It was totally symmetrical on top. The complicating factor for Laura is there's been this little meso-vortex rotating around inside the larger vortex ever since it went over Puerto Rico. You could see it on the radar in Puerto Rico. The meso-vortex was over Puerto Rico. The recon kept finding the lowest pressure south of Puerto Rico. And then you could see the meso-vortex over Cuba. And tonight, if you look at the satellite image, it looks like the meso-vortex is already coming off the west coast of Cuba, but the recon's finding the lowest pressure south of Cuba. So the structure's not aligned vertically yet. But the thing that worries me is if it gets out into the Gulf of Mexico, it's still under that upper high. And we're at the time of year where we've seen hurricanes intensify very quickly over the central Gulf of Mexico. I'm old enough, I remember Camille in 1969, but Katrina is sort of the big August example, in 2005.
And you mentioned rapid intensification. is that it feels like to me that we've seen a lot more of that in the last few years. Is that just because we're looking for it more and we just know what to look for? Or is it because it's happening more frequently?
I think it's happening more frequently. And part of that is, I mean, you need a hurricane in the right environment to get rapid intensification. But I mean, we've seen a lot of cases. We saw Michael in 2018. I mean, that was an October storm. I mean, who expected an October storm to reach Category 5 before it hit Northwest Florida? I mean, Camille was the only other Cat 5 to hit the Gulf Coast on our record, and that was in this time of year, third week of August. And then last year, we had Dorian, one of the most intense hurricanes in the record for the Atlantic. And you were asking about my index. Well, I compared Michael and Dorian. And for much of their lifespan, they were very similar. But then Michael made landfall, so obviously it stopped intensifying. Dorian kept getting stronger, and it went through an IRO replacement cycle, which always makes it bigger. Now, the biggest index that I've seen was for Katrina. That got to 73.2, and that was when it was a big Cat 5 over the central Gulf of Mexico. In terms of Laura, I think it could be weaker than Harvey was, but about the same size that Harvey was when it gets to the northwest Gulf of Mexico in a couple of days.
Kim?
Yeah, I'm really glad that we're talking about rapid intensification, because when thinking about applying your index, it sounds like one of the things that you want emergency managers to know is not just its current status, but what it could become. And as hurricane forecasting improves, could you envision offering something like a range of possible values for this, the strength indicator when it's near landfall, because you want to offer the high-end potential, especially if we are, as you say, possibly seeing rapid intensification happen more often. You don't want people preparing for a 55 when at landfall it's going to be a 77.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And I do that now because NHC and their forecast advisories do give the wind radii out into the future, and they also predict an intensity out in the future. So I have the data and I calculate the index going forward, and then I also make my own forecast. And so I might adjust those numbers. So I really have two sort of projections out into the future. And so, if somebody wants to know that information, I'm happy to supply it to them. So, your suggestion's perfect. And I do that. That's one reason why the potential for Laura being like Harvey. I mean, I was calculating what Laura might be in 48 hours.
That's really impressive. Sorry, go ahead, Nate.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to follow up with another possible area of impact. One of the things that I've noticed that tends to correspond to damage for some of these hurricanes, especially large ones that are landfalling, is the storm surge. It's not just what people would think of as the wind causing all of the damage. Do you feel like your scale does a good job of trying to connect to that reality in some way? Or do you, when you communicate about it, do you try to communicate about it in conjunction with other kinds of products like the Hurricane Center Storm Surge product?
Right. I try to tailor the communications to who I'm dealing with. So, for example, say I'm working with an insurance company or somebody who's interested in the wind damage. They don't do the storm surge or that sort of thing. So I try to separate out that and just talk about the wind damage. But in terms of the total damage, I do think my index does do, at least based on the comparison of damage and the index, in capturing the potential of the storm surge. because storm surge, and we've seen that with a lot of hurricanes. It's partly the shape of the coast, the bathymetry, but it's also driven by the size and the intensity of the hurricane. Now, a case with Katrina, the levee failures in New Orleans, really exacerbated the damage. But other than that, my index seems to do a pretty good job of correlating with the total damage in NHC's tropical cyclone reports after the hurricanes. Now, there are always these exceptions because damage also depends on where a hurricane hits and how much there is buildup on the coast. But I think it does really do a good job in terms of capturing the storm surge. Now, one thing it doesn't do, and we saw this with Harvey, is it's not going to capture the damage due to freshwater flooding and heavy rainfall. And I think, it's nice to have an index that captures a lot of things, but I don't think we should try to have one index that captures everything. And so, again, like the point you were making, we need to communicate what the nature of the risk is and, which risk might affect which place, in addition to how severe the storm might be overall.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk to you about just sort of how you got into weather. 3 degrees from Ohio State. You teach at Ohio State. How does a guy in a landlocked state get interested in hurricanes? It's the same question I'd ask Phil Klotzbach if he was here. It's like, you live in Colorado. What is it, that got you interested in hurricanes and studying this particular aspect of it?
Well, I was born in Cincinnati, and my parents moved around a lot, but we lived in Ohio off and on. And as a kid, I was sort of interested in all sorts of science, right? I mean, and of course, like everybody else, it's the stuff that blows up, volcanoes, severe thunderstorms. I didn't know anything about hurricanes. And then finally, one year, my parents got tired of northern winters. Maybe because it got 10 below zero that winter and it was cold and snowy. So they moved us. Sorry?
It sounds delightful.
Yeah.
I would send some of that here to North Carolina in August. I'll take it.
So my parents moved the family down to Northwest Florida. We moved to a small place called Lynn Haven, which is near Panama City. And, suddenly down there, you've got the sea breeze, thunderstorms, and then hurricane season rolls around. And everybody's talking about hurricanes and so on. And that just happened to be one of the years back in the 1960s when a hurricane hit South Florida. And so I've got the Rand McNally Road Atlas out, and I'm plotting the latitude and longitude. And this is weather you can see. I mean, the wind's blowing and so on. Because the storm came out into the Gulf of Mexico. It was weakened. It was just a tropical storm. So I started reading everything that I could get on hurricanes. Now, I had no idea I was going to turn this into a career, right? So I had an opportunity to come back to Ohio State to go to college. And so I did. And I sort of searched around. And I actually took an honors physical geography class. We had to write 2 papers. And I wrote one paper on some work on tornadoes and the effect of river valleys on tornadoes. And Skaggs had done some work on that. And I sort of wrote a research paper on that. And then the second paper was on hurricanes. And the professor liked it, encouraged me to keep going on. And so I just kept going on to school and studying hurricanes, and here I am.
There you are.
Yep.
What do you have for, there's been some conversation we've had a number of years just in the last decade where we've had storms form before the official beginning of the Atlantic hurricane season and even in the Eastern Pacific. And there's been some chatter here and there about, well, maybe we should extend the hurricane season to, up it to May 15th or even May 1st. What are your thoughts on that? Or should there even be a hurricane season at all? Should we just, call them like we see them and don't worry about an official beginning and an end?
Yeah. Well, and you probably want to talk to the director of the National Hurricane Center about this, but I assume the hurricane season is more for the people who work at the Hurricane Center, right? Because they start the tropical outlooks on a regular basis the first day of the hurricane season, and they end the tropical outlooks on a regular basis at the end of the hurricane season. And then if there's anything that comes up either before or after, then they'll do special tropical outlooks and write advisory package. The atmosphere doesn't care, right? I mean, That's sort of convenience for us human beings. And the atmosphere is going to do what it's going to do. If there's going to be a tropical storm in April or May, it's going to form, whether we call that part of the hurricane season or not. And I think it's important. I mean, I hear people talk a lot about fish storms. It doesn't affect anybody. Well, again, remember, there are industries, transportation out over the ocean, ships out there that do care about those storms. So, I mean, I think it's important that NHC, observe, classify, if necessary, start generating advisories, even if it's a small system out of the season over the ocean, because that could affect certain industries or people, and so on. So I don't have a problem with that, but I don't think, people seem to know when the hurricane season is. I think it's useful in terms of public awareness, communication prior to the season, and that's important, getting people ready. And we don't want to burn out the forecasters by making the hurricane season from April 1st to New Year's Eve. So they have to write a bunch of tropical. Now it may just say tropical cyclones are not expected to form during the next 5 days. But, I sort of like the season the way it is.
In terms of this season, we've had the earliest, I've lost track now, the earliest number of storms and the earliest such and such storm. It seems like every other storm is hitting that record now. When this season is all said and done, and you put your prognosticating cap on, when we get to November 30th, where is 2020 going to rank in terms of hurricane seasons? Is it going to be, are we going to get into the Greek alphabet like we did in 2005? Is it going to suddenly just go quiet and we get lucky? What do you feel about, in terms of the overall pattern and potentially, looking at landfalls of potentially major hurricanes later in the season? You have any thoughts on that?
I think we have a good chance of getting into the Greek alphabet. It's only August the 24th. Right? We've already had Marco. So they don't use all 26 letters. So that, I think we have a good chance of getting the Greek alphabet. Now, having said that, that's a little misleading. We've had a lot of really weak storms that haven't done much. So in terms of the major case, this is not like 2005. Right? I mean, by 2005, we'd had Emily and Katrina that were Cat 5s. We'd had Dennis that was a Cat 4. Right? Dennis hit the U.S. Katrina was about to hit the U.S. Right? So the impacts aren't necessarily going to compare. Now, having said that, we can get Cat 5 storms in September, October. I mean, Wilma was late October. It was a Cat 5 in the Caribbean, but it did substantial damage to South Florida. So even though there have only been minor impacts so far to the U.S., I don't want to write the season off, but it's not going to be 2005 in terms of intensity.
Dr. Hobgood, I have a couple of questions, but first of all, I thought you needed to know that I went to the Penn State University, but I like you, and so I'm just not going to hold that against the fact that you went to the other school.
I appreciate that.
You people in your definite articles. I don't know what the deal is.
Hey, just making sure everybody knows.
We don't even like saying the entire name of our state in ours. It's just NC State.
And I live in the Columbus area, so I should come down there and sit in on one of your classes. But
yeah, that'd be great.
Anyway, I'm trying to wrap my head around the index and how it works. How do you follow it all the way to the end of the hurricane or the tropical system, even further inland?
Yeah, I calculate it at every 6-hour advisory period, and if they change the intensity, I'll adjust it in between. But it's really only useful, at least I feel, in the lead up to landfall. I mean, it's designed to help people prepare, sort of know what's coming. Because as soon, even before a storm makes landfall, part of the circulation will be over land, and you'll start to see the wind radii contracting, right? So the size of the hurricane is going to shrink. And then the wind speeds start coming down pretty rapidly. So I calculated, but the really useful, and why I created it was to give people advance notice of what they might expect in terms of impacts.
What's the future of your index? What are you doing with it, and who are you proposing it to, and who's using it? And
well, I'm sort of making it available to anybody who wants to use it. I use it on my own consulting work and my own research to compare hurricanes. And so I have some clients that I supply the index to, and then they can use it with their other information they have in their records to sort of estimate, what sort of damage they might have to deal with in terms. I've also, shared it with some emergency managers who wanted it. And at least one website uses it to characterize the size and intensity of a hurricane. So, I made it to be used and to be useful, so I'm happy to share it with anybody. One suggestion that people have made, and I got this from the last hurricane conference, was that you might want to keep the index as it was, but in terms of trying to calculate the damage potential, take into account how fast the storm is moving. Because if you get a storm that's moving slower, obviously you're in the high wind part of the storm for a longer period of time. And so the damage, so that's sort of the, I'm not going to change the index itself, but maybe do a little add-on or sort of a little plus tweak and take a look at how fast the hurricane moves as to whether that, might be able to improve the index a little bit.
That's almost an addition of an integrated component, sort of integrated across the line of the track of the storm.
Hey, Jay, is it time to do away with the Saffir-Simpson scale?
I actually was fortunate enough to get to meet Bob Simpson a couple of times, and so I really respect what he does. And if people are comfortable with the Saffir-Simpson scale, I know a lot of emergency managers use it. The way I look at it is, the more tools we have in our toolbox, the better off we are. So if people want to keep using the Saffir-Simpson scale, I'm fine with that. I'm just proposing this as something that might be more useful in certain situations.
And give a grade to the National Hurricane Center on Marco and Laura so far. Grade them.
I'll give them an A. I mean, those people are dedicated. They work hard. Marco is tough. I mean, these tiny little hurricanes, you get like a 5-knot increase in the wind shear, they get blown apart. And there was one, and I can't remember which forecast it was, put out a really good discussion over the weekend. We actually predicted a stair-step intensity change. And when the shear would go up, the intensity would go down, but then the shear would relax, and the intensity would go up, and Marco would become a hurricane, at least temporarily. And that was right on the mark. Laura, I think they're doing a great job with. The models have been not quite as good as we'd like. I mean, the models seem to overdo the shear on Marco, and so it was consistently to the right of the track. And it seems like Laura's been consistently a little left on the cone. So I think intensity-wise, they've been doing great. The track's been off a little bit. I mean, they're all over it, and their forecasts are usually pretty close to the final landfall point.
Yeah, I see all these armchair, weather people on Twitter and Facebag, and they just tear up these people at the National Hurricane Center. Well, here's my position on that. Well, if you're so good, you go down there and you work a shift and you put out a forecast package, and let's see how well you do with this stuff. This is not easy, JP. People think any idiot can come in here, look at a bunch of spaghetti plots and, draw these dots. It's hard. There's a lot more to it than what people think.
Well, that and people cherry pick the model output. I mean, on social media, you'll see one model intensity forecast or one model track And you're right. Trying to forecast the weather is humbling. I mean, if you think you're perfect, don't become a weather forecaster because you get disabused of that notion in a real hurry.
How many times have we seen the hurricane wharf being posted here in the last week?
Yeah. And the problem is you don't want to discount it because every so often, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was Hannah. Some of those specialized hurricane models actually caught the late intensification right as it headed towards South Texas. So that's the other tricky thing. You have to look at every model, but you can't necessarily jump on any model. And I think that's the reason why NHC and the serious forecasters use consensus forecast, where they combine the various models and you sort of hope that the errors of the different models average out.
That's the good old ensemble approach. So one more thing here, Jay. A lot of people are watching us in Houston, and they're getting nervous. What would you tell them tonight?
I would say be very weather aware. I mean, it's not time to get too concerned yet, but as I said, Laura seems to have been moving a little bit to the left edge of the cone, and that's uncomfortably close to the Houston area. So at this point, the hurricane watch is right, the boundary of the hurricane watch is right near Galveston, right, Port Bolivar. So at this point, just pay close attention and then listen to what your local emergency managers and the media who are getting the message out tell you what to do.
And what would you tell our friends in Lake Charles?
Prepare for a serious hurricane. I think, even if it goes into Houston, Lake Charles is going to be on the right-hand side, and that's going to be where the strongest winds are. That's going to be where the winds are blowing the water towards the coast. So you're going to get storm surge there. You may get heavy rain. So, I would, if I was in Lake Charles, I would be getting ready for a serious hurricane.
All right. Well, Jay, if you have to go, but if you can hang on, that's great too.
I'd love to stay with you folks. I'm having a great time.
So now I'll warn you now for now Bruce knows the routine here, but Jay, in just a little bit, we're going to ask you for a pick of the week. This can be a website, hardware, anything related to weather. Okay. So before the show is over here in about 15 minutes, be ready for a pick of the week. This is your fair warning here. So Aubrey, let me see if she's back here because we have to do the email inbox. She has a 10 o'clock Eastern time newscast. So let's kind of look at some stuff other than tropical weather. I don't know if it looks like we got a big trough digging down across the middle of the country in about a week. Kim, did you see that? I mean, I don't know who's paying attention to the weather here, but that's exciting to me because guess what happens next week? It's the beginning of meteorological fall. I mean, how did this happen? And you're seeing all these.
Give it to me.
No.
But did you guys see this big trough digging down on these global models of the Northern Plains next week? I mean, wow.
I'm so glad to hear about it. Sadly, I've been so focused on the tropics, and I know obviously systems coming off of the continent are important to tropical development, but just looking up beyond a couple of days, I hadn't done. So thank you for the good news. I'll look now.
Yeah, I'm just saying there is, and it's very consistent in global modeling. So I think for some of our friends, and in fact, I actually saw some snow in the high terrain showing up in parts of Montana and Wyoming, and that's a sign of the times. I mean, I think I'm a big fall fan. Out of all the seasons, that is my October is the most magical month of the year. Because where we are, typically the tropics have settled down. We really don't have the tornadoes until November. It's just a calm month, and the colors, and it's just that cobalt blue sky. It's an amazing time of the year. So just saying the word October, cool trough digging down. It is almost our time of the year here. So
the dew points start to come down out of the stratosphere too, and
Yes.
it just gets comfortable.
Yeah.
You can walk from your car to your office and not get sweaty and sticky and nasty.
Yeah, James, after that plug for fall, I just have to ask, you're not paid by the pumpkin spice flavoring industry, are you?
Well, I'm a social media influencer and I get paid by Starbucks for their, no, I don't. have you guys seen how much money these influencers make over here on TikTok and Instagram, and the products and services they get? It's just crazy stuff. All right. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to, there's Aubrey. Aubrey,
I'm here.
You're back.
I am
so
here.
what I'm going to do is roll the music, and just maybe, there could be some email this week.
Letters. We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
All right. I'm going to start with a photo and see if I can screen share. Oh, nope. James has to allow me to screen share. Interesting.
What?
Host
Well-
disabled participant screen sharing. Uh-oh, did someone abuse it?
Wow. Allow record. Goodness, I've never had that problem before.
All right. Oh,
Pooey.
we can skip it. That's fine. But I did want to say this one came in from Michael Hansen. It's actually the sun just before sunset, lowering in the sky about 45 miles north of Billings, Montana on Saturday. And the sky is very smoky, very hazy, and the sun is just a brilliant orange. It kind of looks like Jupiter from a distance. So we appreciate that. And it is, we can try it again. Nope, still not. That's okay. So we thank you for that photo. Let's see. This one is from Tyler Harris. Just curious, I was listening to an older episode and I heard you guys talking about sweatshirts and WeatherBrains gear. Are you guys now or in the future looking at selling any more gear? Have not discussed it.
We sold the gear and we took the money and gave it to one of the scholarship funds. I want to say the NWA Scholarship Fund. So maybe we should do that again. So I'll see. I'll see what I can put together here. We do need some new gear.
Let's task Troy with that. He's not here to say no.
Yeah, exactly. We all in favor of putting Troy on the apparel committee. Say aye. Aye. He's railroaded in. There you go.
You could do it before Christmas. They make great Christmas gifts.
They do.
Let's see. This one is from Justin Cook. Well, that week was near a decade here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, following the derecho that came through here last Monday, which would have been a couple weeks ago. Now it was back at the beginning of the month. What was that, on the 10th, I believe? There's been a fair amount of discussion amongst the non-weather community on the need for a derecho warning. The main comment seems to be, we know what a severe thunderstorm is, and that wasn't. And that's a good point. And we did discuss that. Was that last week's WeatherBrains or the week before with Greg Shore about the tiered warnings that will be coming out? So
Yeah.
Justin.
We talked about that a little bit a couple episodes ago.
So that was looking the episodes within the last 1 to 2 weeks. And we did discuss that with the National Weather Service and with the forecast products, what am I trying to think of? The, what are we calling it? The fee that's coming out.
Probabilistic hazard information.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that people in Iowa are just now, and some of them, getting their power back. One of the meteorologists at a TV station in Cedar Rapids now shifted careers to another station, but he was out for 12 days, I think. It was just insane how long people were going out of power for that. And there was a Daryl Hertzman posted a comparison shot from a sky cam right before the morning of the derecho. And then they just got the camera power back online and they took a picture, and the amount of foliage and trees that are down just in that one frame is incredible.
I know at the 10-day mark, I had put something together for our website, and there was still, I think, 60,000 customers without power after the 10 days.
It's amazing.
Quite incredible. James, I've got Tarmo's message. Do you want to roll?
Yeah. So we haven't had Tarmo with an audio message in a couple of years, I think. So I just like to hear the guy talk. So here we go.
Hello, WeatherBrains from Lago, Estonia. This is Tarmo Danilso speaking in personal capacity. I couldn't help but notice that you had a pretty bad derecho down there in the United States earlier this month. And when I say pretty bad, let's just say I have been exposed a lot to the British culture and British English language. So I may throw in British understatement every now and then. What clearly happened in Iowa, it makes the derecho I myself lived through 10 years ago feel like a slight breeze. And what I had 10 years ago was crazy. The storm hit on a Sunday evening and I didn't get the electricity back until early hours on Friday. That's well above 3 standard deviations for a typical weather-induced power cut around here. So we had it pretty wild back then, but nowhere near as wild than Iowa had. So thoughts and prayers to people down there who are still picking up pieces. Now, this talk about a land hurricane, well, I must admit, when I was hit by a derecho back then in 2010, as the storm was raging, as the rainwater was virtually horizontal, I was actually thinking exactly about that. I was telling myself, gee, this must be how it feels to be in a hurricane. And once again, what we had back then pales in comparison to what just happened in the United States earlier this month. But even we back then had hurricane force gusts and quite a bit of damage. Pretty much Western Estonia was okay. Eastern Estonia was picking up pieces for quite a while. So I can definitely understand where the talk about a land hurricane in the non-weather savvy population is coming from. I, a weather nerd myself, was telling myself I was using the H word, obviously not in the strict sense, but nonetheless. I also couldn't help but notice a particular linguistical quirk. You see, in English, hurricane only refers to a tropical cyclone, but a number of European languages, such as German, there are 2 words for a hurricane. One meaning a hurricane force storm, tropical or not, the other referring to the tropical cyclone. Technically, it's the same in Estonian, but in practice, we only use the word for a hurricane force storm, tropical, non-tropical, for both types. But just something to think about. Well, I sure hope the inclement weather now headed your way wouldn't be too bad, and I apologize if I'm stuttering every now and a bit. I'm literally ad-libbing. And that's it from here from Lago Estonia. Have a nice evening.
His English is a lot better than my Estonian, that's for sure.
You know, back in the 1800s, we did use that word hurricane almost interchangeably with tornadoes. And some of Finley's research, they were questioning whether he was doing, following the track of a tornado or a hurricane. So any kind of, I think, windstorm back then was either a tempest, a hurricane, or a tornado. And I think those terminologies were thrown around quite liberally.
We interrupt this program for a CBS Radio Net Alert Bulletin.
Marco is now
So Laura
a
is a
depression.
tropical storm, right?
Aubrey has a call coming in.
Sorry, that was our producer just confirming weather data.
So Marco,
I mean, it's breaking
is now
news. I
officially
mean, you expect your producers to be on top of that. So good for
That's
them
true.
for checking in.
They heard the breaking news jingle and they know. But no, Marco is a depression now, drifting westward, almost out of here. All right, we got to do picks of the week, and this is where we go around the horn. Everybody shares something that is very interesting, weather related, preferably. And so let's just start with Kim. I know you got a pick of the week for us this week.
I do. So I was really intrigued by the potential for this week to have been an examination of the Fujiwara effect and, interacting with a Gulf landfall. And I've followed the effect more from a colleague who works at the Joint Typhoon warning center in the Pacific in Hawaii, he has forecasted for several systems that have done this in the Pacific. I guess this is actually a more common phenomenon in the Pacific than it is in the Atlantic. And I wanted, so I was just sort of digging around to try to find some background on, how often does this really happen and affect the US? And I happened upon this really neat abstract for the AMS annual meeting a couple of years ago that was written about the history of the effect and how there's actually been some influence for US services, service members serving abroad. And it actually was something that caused some havoc in World War II for our Navy, for people who are stationed outside of Japan, where this effect is more common to observe. So one of the things that's such an interesting feature of this is it would have made track forecasting so difficult to communicate. Imagine if you have to manage a naval fleet with spinning tropical systems going around one another. What do you do? So just a neat little talk that I found.
Very cool. I can't wait to see that. That's awesome. Thanks, Kim. All right, Aubrey, what's your pick of the week? I know you got one.
So mine is actually kind of a cool website from AMS. I hadn't seen this section of the site before, but it's current surface maps and upper air maps. But one I kind of like is the radar data loop with fronts over the last 64 hours. It's sometimes nice to see, I guess, if you come back from maybe a long weekend or on vacation or something like that, and you're trying to wrap your head around what's been going on. It's kind of nice to go from past to forward to catch up on a few things, especially as maybe some of us are taking a little bit more time off coming up after being stuck during the COVID. So just thought it was kind of cool and just an extra map site to put in your bookmarks.
Awesome. All of these links will be on weatherbrains.com in the show notes. Nate, what's on your mind?
So last week I mentioned when we were talking to Dr. Jacobs earlier that I threw something out on Twitter. Everybody's got an origin story. I think when we talk about weather, a lot of us can point back to a specific day, a specific event, a visit from a meteorologist in their school, something like that. Not everybody, but I feel like we've got a lot more folks in that category in weather than perhaps a lot of other industries. And so we threw that out on Twitter. I had more than 100 responses and lots of really good ones. Some folks, again, not can't pin it to a particular day, but a lot of tornadoes, a lot of hurricanes, some flooding, some lightning strikes, a lot of things invoking and inspiring meteorological careers. And yes, visits from people like old James Spann over there, inspiring people to get into the weather business. So it was really cool. And you may thumb through that thread and the responses to that original tweet, and you'll see maybe some origin stories of people that you know on Twitter or from elsewhere. Get a little insight into who they are and why they're doing weather.
Very fun thread. That was a great question and some great response. And I got to ask, Nate, I mean, I've noticed this now for a while. Why in the world do you have a VHF or a UHF antenna sitting in your office?
Why not? So I have a television sitting on the desk over here next to a Max computer, and I don't have cable, so I have to use the antenna if I want to watch TV. So I've got a Roku streaming device and the antenna there, and whenever I want to dial in the stations, I just plug that into the TV, and there you go.
You know, most people put them outside somewhere, but hey, to each their own.
I'm in a spot where I don't need to. It works fine right where it is, and I don't want to poke holes in the wall or anything like that. My wife would be upset with me about that. So.
He doesn't want to get that nasty letter from the HOA in his exclusive neighborhood.
Trying to. I still keep looking around, seeing if I can find a place in this room to actually hang it on the wall. It's sort of like wall art that's functional, but the problem is I can't do that. And have it pointed in the right direction because the walls of the room are not oriented toward the tower farm in the way that they need to be. So,
okay, hey, if it works, it works. No problem here. Yeah. All right, Jen, what's your pick of the week?
I have a tweet. I had never heard of the International Center for Waterspout Research, but they're out there and they calculated 88 waterspouts on the Great Lakes, August 16th through the 19th, and that was a record. And so I have a tweet of one of those on Lake Ontario. So
Very cool.
record-breaking waterspouts. There you go.
I like it. All right, Bruce, what's on your mind this week?
All right, our second most deadly tornado in U.S. history was St. Louis, 1896, May of 1896. And in the aftermath of that tornado, the American Society of Civil Engineers put this booklet together. And the title of the booklet is Wind Pressures in the St. Louis Tornado, with special reference to the necessity of wind bracing for high buildings.
Wow.
And they studied the damage to the buildings. By high buildings, they mean, 4, 5, 6, 8 stories tall. I don't know if you can see that or not.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what they concluded? If you build buildings stronger, they'll do better in these storms. That was 1896.
Okay. You learn a lot by reading some of those books sometimes. Wow.
I wish they'd do something about it.
Yeah. All right. All right, Jay, we've stalled long enough. What's your pick of the week? Go.
My pick of the week is I'd recommend that people read the discussions in addition to the advisories and looking at the code and agency. And I particularly want to call out the forecaster Zelinsky. I cheated while we were sort of doing some of the other things. And he was the one who wrote the discussion about the stepwise change in intensity of Marco. But a lot of the forecasters there will provide a lot of great insight into what they're thinking. And you can also learn a lot of meteorology at the same time. So if you're not looking at those on a routine basis and you're interested in tropical cyclones, I would say they do prognostic reasoning also on the Joint Typhoon Warning Center website. So, look at the discussions. You'll discover some of the forecasters that you see have really good sense of humor too.
They do. They actually do. Sometimes you'll see a little funny in there sometimes, but no, those discussions are great. In mine, it's the Morphed Integrated Microwave Imagery from our friends up at the University of Wisconsin, the Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies. Very interesting product to use during tropical season. But hey, speaking of the tropics, you know what I got to do? I've got to go into a good old Studio A and do some TV here and wrap this thing up. But hey, thanks to everybody for being on the show. This was a great show. If you would like to get in touch with us, our email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. And Aubrey does an email segment most every week, and the show notes, the links, all on the website, weatherbrains.com. We typically are on the air every Monday night at 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern. And we know that most of you listen the podcast version. But again, if you want to get in touch with us, send us an email. But to all of you, thanks so much for listening. We'll see you guys next week. Have a great week and God bless. Bye-bye, everybody. All right, y'all. I got to run. Thank y'all. Great show tonight. That was fun.
Thanks for having
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
Thanks, everybody. It was great. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.